Here.
Maria Bonneville.
Present.
Joyce Saki. Anne Marie DeLiege.
Yes.
Elena Flowers. Judy Gasson.
Here.
Vito Bassiani. Here. Pat Levitt.
Here.
Linda Malkus.
Here.
And Adriana Padilla. Great. Thank you, Judy. We have a quorum.
Excellent. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We have one item on the agenda, and that's by a presentation by our board chair, Vito Bassiani, on the sustainability of the ICOC. So Vito, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Judy. And thanks everyone for sharing part of their afternoon here. I'm going to share some slides. It's a very short 20 slide deck. So we should get through this pretty expeditiously. I'm comfortable if people want to stop me along the way and ask questions, but there certainly will be a question and discussion period at the end. So let's start. A brief introduction to the topic. I mean brief. The money that CIRM uses to support basic discovery and clinical research in regenerative medicine, along with our infrastructure, manufacturing, and education programs, comes from its ability to derive income from the sale of state bonds granted to us by the passage of Propositions 71 and 14 in the years 2004 and 2020, respectively. CIRM leadership is actively engaged in estimating how many dollars remain available for investment in research, infrastructure, and workforce development, and for the associated administrative costs. In any case, we know that CIRM's revenue stream does not automatically renew, and that eventually CIRM will run out of research funds. This prompts the organization to investigate all possible avenues to securing sufficient additional funding to afford CIRM the opportunity to extend its useful existence past its projected last funding year in order to continue pioneering advances in regenerative medicine. You see, I've altered our mission statement ever so slightly, but I assure you it's only for the purpose of underlying the theme of this presentation. I'd like to start with just a very quick overview of what CIRM has accomplished over 20 years. I include this visual. Oh, and by the way, there's a correction already. Thanks to a very recent granting action at the last board meeting, the number of clinical trials has risen now to 113. But I include this visual as support for the position that CIRM should continue its existence by some means or other. 20 years ago, at CIRM's founding, the number in each of these categories was 0. To quote a legal maxim, the thing speaks for itself. There are many ways to measure the success of CIRM, and these 6 are some of them that demonstrate the impact the research we have funded has had on the lives of California patients and their families. So you see clinical trials, consented patients, our educational adventure in bringing over 4,000 interns and fellows into the workforce, the foundation and supplying outfitting 9 alpha clinics. But clinical and educational milestones are just the tip of the iceberg. They are not the only way to measure success. You see here the extraordinary impact CIRM has had in the number of new businesses created by CIRM grantees and in the number of dollars invested in CIRM projects by industry. But these last 2 categories alone, while impressive, barely scratch the surface of CIRM's true and total economic impact, which would include the value of workforce development, the square footage of all the laboratory spaces, the taxes paid by all CIRM-sponsored entities and its grantees, the market value of the businesses born out of CIRM research dollars, the income to universities from licensing agreements, and so on. Past economic impact reports have quantified CIRM's value to the state. An updated EIR would certainly demonstrate continued expansion. So this is possibly an exhaustive list, possibly, of options of where CIRM could look to create a revenue source. Nothing on this list would surprise anyone working in the world of philanthropy or foundation development offices. The options: philanthropy, government support. I'll go through each of these in subsequent slides. Partnerships with CIRM, foundation model, which is a variation of philanthropy, a third ballot initiative, and sunsetting CIRM and shuttering the Institute. Recently, I convened a small informal group of present and former board members to advise the chair on what avenues to explore or not. This group recently had its first meeting to discuss in a very preliminary way the options listed above and to debate and offer feedback on the same. There was no other agenda item discussed. The group agreed to meet periodically or on an ad hoc basis. But we are just at the very start of a process, and I certainly would like to identify and speak with other individuals or entities, some known to me at present and others yet to be identified. What about the conversations I've had with people outside that advisory group? Approximately 24 interviews were conducted by me with persons familiar with CIRM and its mission and history. These individuals included a former governor, present and past members of the legislature, lobbyists in Sacramento, and subject matter experts, including ballot campaign managers, fundraisers, and pollsters, leaders in the world of organized medicine, University of California and other research organization members, former ICOC members, chairs, and vice chairs, former CIRM CEOs, outside legal experts, patient advocates, and other stakeholders. Yet to be included are representatives of industry and pharma and experts in the development or philanthropy world. Let me finish with that slide because it's key to the 6 slides that follow. All interviewees were presented the same menu of choices. Some people commented and certainly had opinions on all options, bless you, others on only some of the options. For each person, the same question was asked: do you think it would be advantageous or profitable for CIRM to pursue this course of action? And I consolidated the preliminary feedback, which you'll see in the form of pie charts. So let's start. Sunsetting. This is the only option that says basically CIRM should not look to prolong its existence. This is where CIRM expends its remaining funds in its typical fashion in the support of scientific advancement and meeting unmet medical needs, and then closes down, leaving enough money to manage the last grants through to their conclusion. But let me explain the pie chart you're looking at. The smaller slice, it happens to be in blue, and the colors, by the way, are derived from CIRM's color chart at the bottom. They don't have any other or political significance. The blue slice of 15%, the minority opinion, says to pursue this option, meaning they think that CIRM should close up shop. The comment I received is, for example, CIRM did a great job. Declare victory in all the things you've done, where you have brought science in your 20 years, and close up shop. 85% of respondents did not agree that we should do that. The second option, philanthropy, including foundations, whether given by individuals, families, or trusts. I don't know if that pie chart surprises you. There's no mistake here. It is a completely red circle. Do not pursue. The comments I heard, for example, CIRM still has access to a lot of money, or philanthropists do not give money to government agencies. Another, even a generous benefactor is unlikely to donate at the level CIRM requires to support its mission. Let me elaborate on this comment for a second. Let's consider a very generous gift of, say, 25 million. Make it $50 million. A gift or a bequest. If the $50 million, which can either be given as an endowment or as current spending, if it's given as an endowment, CIRM would only likely receive approximately 5% of that bequest, or about 2.5 million a year. That would fund one very small award. If CIRM received the bequest as current spending, even $50 million would cover only 2 months of typical CIRM funding. Let's say that's a very, very generous $500 million gift. That would just cover 1 year of activity at CIRM, and makes me wonder how many such people are there out there in our universe. Another comment. Benefactors seldom pool their gifts or bequests with other donors. Comment from me. This is why endowed chairs, hospital pavilions or wings, and even entire medical schools, for example, are typically named after only one donor, or at most, a donor and spouse, or the donor's family trust. And finally, another comment. CIRM would be competing for financial support with our own stakeholders. Moving on to the third option, government, where CIRM becomes subject to the ups and downs of the annual budget cycle and the oversight function of the legislature, whether it relies on the state's general fund, where we are another line item in the state budget, or on bond sales from a legislature-referred ballot initiative. No interest in this option at all. Comments I heard, CIRM would lose its autonomy. Others would decide CIRM's budget and its priorities, and greater transparency could interfere with CIRM's confidential review process. So, a very interesting conversation among the present and former board members on the advisory group discussed that the advantages of having a second look, the first look being 10 years ago, thereabouts, collaborating with pharma, given the advances in science over the last 20 years, considering that the landscape has changed dramatically recently. Many patents that pharma holds are expiring or set to expire in the near future, threatening pharma's pipeline. That pharma has been increasingly reliant on universities to develop promising science that they could invest in. That CIRM, however, has a robust pipeline of promising cell and gene therapies, including up to the level of clinical trials. So there is the possibility, advisors say, of a win-win collaboration with pharma that was not even possible during the earlier conversations. I've made outreach to pharma and the Pharma Foundation. Notice the different spelling here. When spelled this way, I'm referring to the brick and mortar building in Washington, D.C., which houses the trade association of all pharmaceutical companies operating in the United States. I suspect the reasons I haven't heard back is because of the turmoil going on in Washington, and but we'll certainly pursue this further. I mentioned the Pharma Foundation because on their website they have supported primary investigators, pre-doctoral fellows, postdoctoral fellowships, individual grants in over 180 colleges and universities throughout the country. I admit that whatever comes out of this, because there's the possibility that pharma might see interest in this, but might leapfrog over CIRM to work directly with our grantees. So not not quite sure yet at this very early stage what will come out of this, but it's possible that if anything does, it might require a structure that has not yet been invented. It might take novel legal agreements between the entities. It might even require legislation.
Sorry, Vito, we have a hand up from Maria.
Thank you.
It's on the previous slide.
Previous slide.
So I just want to make sure to distinguish between the fact that in our everyday course of work, we engage with entities to have partnerships. So for example, the science team will oftentimes look to foundations that, like, for example, Michael J. Fox Foundation could be an example. If they are funding research, oftentimes we look to see if there are joint partnerships that we can have around a specific area, a specific PI, et cetera. That should not, and that happens regardless. So I don't think that's the sort of partnership we are referring to when we talk about this.
Right.
This is partnerships that are outside of a structure that are created in order to sustain CIRM, which is different than partnering on occasion with different entities. So we need to be very clear when we talk about partnerships. And I don't know what you meant by partnerships, because it sounded like you were talking about both. So I just want to make sure that the partnerships that are with foundations and things like that that are separate are things that the science team internally works on, or that, you know, if anyone were to meet with someone that said we're interested in partnering with you, we would obviously, you know, go to JT or Rosa or whomever and say, hey, this entity is interested and is there an opportunity? So I think this is more along the lines of creating something that's different.
Exactly, right. It's interesting that you bring up as examples the foundations. I wasn't thinking of the foundations at all here, but rather Merck, Pfizer.
But those are also in the same vein, right? So they would not be so I guess my point being, we have to look at it outside of a singular grant or PI or project and look at it as a global thing instead.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for that. Yeah, okay. I've see, have I advanced? Yes. All right. The last option is a ballot initiative. You can see by the pie chart, there's a lot of enthusiasm for this. 95% of people saying this, we should pursue this option. Let's take a look. What does that entail? That some individual or outside entity takes on the task and the expense of polling, of creating funding and managing a campaign to place a citizen initiated, that means signatures, constitutional amendment, or more likely statute, bond initiative on a future ballot. The difference between a constitutional amendment and a statute is about 250 to 300,000 signatures. This entity or CIRM would write the initiative and determine both the amount of bond authority to seek as well as the timing of that ballot. A reminder, this is mostly for members of the board who are new or inexperienced in this venue. CIRM can educate the public on such a thing as a ballot initiative, but cannot advocate either for or against the initiative, nor can its officers, employees, or board members. I put a footnote down here. The 2020 effort garnered about 932,000 signatures, way more than it was required. And the number of signatures that were obtained, the high 600,000s, qualified for the ballot on the first review for validity, but which was good because those signatures were gathered, I'm told by JT, about 2 weeks before the state closed down during the COVID pandemic, which would have made signature gathering even more of a Herculean task. But at 900,000 signatures, with a expenditure of $8 to $10 million, that comes down to about $10 a signature. The ensuing campaign cost $20 million. The total raised by the no side was only $1,350. And I'll refer back to that number when we get to a later slide. For new board members, just a reminder or news, the Proposition 71 read, establishes a constitutional right to conduct stem cell research, creates the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, and issues a $3 billion bond to CIRM fund. The vote in November 2004 was this: the yes vote 60% approximately, the no vote 40%. For a ballot initiative, 60-40 is nigh on a landslide. But that money didn't last forever. I'm sorry, I went backwards. And around 10 years later, when CIRM realized that it was going to run out of money, it had the first of a number of conversations at the board level on sustainability. The first time it went through this exercise, a transition subcommittee was established, which met jointly with the science subcommittee throughout the fall of 2017. And the ICOC settled on two options, one of which was much more palatable than the other. And the more palatable one was they supported the idea of a citizen-led bond measure in November, on the November 2020 ballot. Much less palatable as a backup option was to ask the legislature to refer a bond measure on our behalf, if you will, on the same ballot. The result was Proposition 14. Let me go back a second and say one more thing about this. So this board was in a very similar situation 9 or 10 years ago, when the end of the money, $3 billion, was fast approaching. In its several discussion, including a presentation by former Chair Robert Klein, the Citizen Ballot Initiative was seen to be the soundest path forward. Mr. Klein then, independently of CIRM, spearheaded the campaign to obtain the necessary signatures, write the initiative, and conduct the ultimately successful campaign to pass Proposition 14. The text of which is here, very simply, issues $5.5 billion in bonds for State Stem Cell Research Institute. This was a statute, not a constitutional amendment, requiring about 250,000 fewer signatures to access the ballot. The vote, very interesting. Approximately 3.5 million more Californians voted no than voted no in 26 on Prop 71, while the yes vote grew about 1.5 million. A comparison of the two votes is also telling. The bottom line is perhaps the most important one on this slide. The delta between the yes and the no's for Prop 71 was 2.15 million, but that delta dropped to 366,000 people in 2020. Of interest, I gleaned from the Secretary of State's website recently, the number of people who went to the polls in November of 2020 and who voted for president. It was Biden v. Trump, and senators and state legislators and the 12 initiatives that were on that ballot. The number of people who left Prop 14 empty was 722,000 people. There's no polling done on this, but you might wonder, was this ignorance, not knowing what the initiative was about? I mean, it talked about stem cell and funding agency, or were the arguments made by the for and against side not convincing? Something to think about for the future. So future conversations. The landscape is shifting in a way and at a pace that would argue against selecting, this is my opinion, at this early stage, one of the options of the six to the exclusion of the others. I think it's premature to make a choice now, but it is not too early to continue to explore those options presently available or to dream of new ones. We do have powerful tools in our armamentarium, our broad portfolio, our growing economic impact, and most importantly, the voices of our patients and their families impacted by our work that can be enlisted when the time comes in support of whatever path presents itself as most promising. This is my ask of the committee and of the full board. I ask the board to be prepared to share and expand the circle of individual or organizations that could contribute their expertise to this endeavor. And this includes contact in the world of pharmaceuticals, foundations, biotechnology, high net worth individuals, and experts in calculating economic impact, among others. Finally, I want to thank the individuals who lent their effort to challenge my assumptions and to refine the content to help polish this presentation. So.
Thank you, Vito. At this point, we will open up the meeting for questions from the members of the Governance Subcommittee. And Scott, if you can also watch for hands, because I can't see everybody at the same time.
Sure, I will do that. I do not see any hands at the moment.
George, did you raise your hand?
I didn't, but I'm happy to ask a question.
Oh, okay.
I have two comments to make. One is I understand the reasons why there was little popularity for the idea of government funding of the CIRM endeavor, but there might be. I just want to suggest that there could be creative ways of thinking about this that might be more palatable, such as an agreement among a few Western states to jointly fund the CIRM type effort, which could lead to more stable funding. So that's one idea I just wanted to put out there. The second point I would make is it's worth thinking about this within the context of what's happening in Washington, D.C. right now. We are seeing lots and lots of grants, particularly biomedical grants, being canceled. There's serious concern about the future of the NIH and what its role is going to be in medical research. That's just the kind of thing that actually led to the first successful initiative that established CIRM. And so I think we need to keep in mind what we're hearing coming out of Washington and be thinking about how that's going to affect public perceptions in California over the next couple of years.
Thank you, George. Excellent points. We have Pat and then Maria, please.
Yeah, thanks, Vito. I echo George's point about careful monitoring what's happening in DC. I can tell you from an analysis that we've done, there have been over 800 grants that have been prematurely terminated. And by the way, 40% of them are NIMH grants, 40% of the 800 that have been early terminations. The other thing is that it's about $1.5 billion and that's not being spent. If you put that into context of the annual federal budget, it's about 0.025%. So it won't even be recognized as a cost savings, but it's having an enormous impact, and it's being targeted obviously because 40% to one institute. There are also institute directors that were fired yesterday, 4 really important ones. So keep that in mind. Vito, maybe you can expand upon, because I'm not familiar with this. There was a differentiation in terms of signatures needed in 2 different scenarios. Can you explain that to me, not informed about the politics of how this works in the state of California? It seems to me to be an important element to consider when you're thinking about getting something on the ballot or something that will change the Constitution.
Sure. Pat, before I start, you mentioned a number that I just want to clarify. 800 grants were terminated where? At your institution alone?
No, NIH.
Oh, NIH, right? Okay.
Yeah. This is just NIH. It's not NSF. It's not HRSA. It's not any of the other federal. It's not, DOE, DOD has terminated grants. Right now we're trying to monitor NIH grants because of the impact of both losing the direct and the indirect cost. But it's over 800 so far that are really terminated, like not threatened to be terminated. Yeah. So it's about 850. That number is going up on a daily basis. So, and there's a Google shared document that's open access that people are monitoring for the listing of the grants. Okay.
To answer your question, I recently had the pleasure of speaking with someone very high up in the Secretary of State's office. Her job, I could, if you need her name, I could get it, but it's not on the top of my head. She's responsible for the conduct of ballot initiatives, referenda, and recalls. And she spent an hour with me going over the rules, if you will, and used as an example what would be required of ballot initiative, people interested in putting something on the ballot in the year 2026, so the next statewide ballot. So if you wanted to put a statute on the ballot, it would require 5% of all, how many signatures? 5% of the total number of votes cast for governor of California in the last gubernatorial election. And that number is for statutes in the high 500,000s. I'm going from memory. If I'm wrong, I'm not wrong by very much. But that number would go up to 800,000 if you proposed a constitutional amendment.
It's also the vote changes as well. You need a higher threshold of people to vote yes for a constitutional change than you do.
And that's probably why that number is 250, 300,000 higher.
Okay. All right.
But with CIRM's history, you should know that in 2004, Prop 71 amended the Constitution, required a high number of signatures. But the Constitution was only changed in very few words. The rest of the enabling language went into health and, Scott, you can help me, health and safety. Health and safety code. Right. So the 2020 ballot initiative was just a change of the statutory language in the health and safety code, requiring a much lower number. So I don't think we need another constitutional amendment. We just, if we go the ballot route, it would be a statutory change.
Okay. All right. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. I see Linda and then Donald.
I have my hand raised too. Sorry.
Maria was next and then Linda.
Okay.
Something I think we should consider, oftentimes, while philanthropy wouldn't be a play that we would make for the sustainability of CIRM, when we needed to raise some monies, for example, for admin costs, were we to wind down the organization, we were able to fundraise around that. And it was known that it was a set amount of money. It was not $10 billion or whatever, sum we think we need to move forward, but there are opportunities perhaps to raise money that is not a long-term sustainability play, but adds to our coffers. I think that something that, there's two things. I think next steps and what comes next from this is important to establish so that we have a clear understanding of how this moves forward. But also, I think in all of these options that were presented, there needs to be sort of a strategic framework for evaluating them that board is then able to say definitively, no, we should not be doing something like this. So that framework needs to be established and brought forward.
Okay.
There were 2 points.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria. Linda?
Yes. So I have a couple of thoughts. One is, one of the big issues, okay, about even partnering with pharma to do any of this is they're always going to look at their ROI.
Linda, I think you froze. Did she?
Yeah.
It looks like.
Linda, we heard you say they're going to look at their return on investment, and I think you must have, do you want to maybe turn your camera off and see if that helps? Oh, wait, now you're completely gone.
Okay.
Well, she's still on, but she did remove her picture.
Oh, okay, Linda. Yeah, okay, you're still on the voice. Okay, go ahead.
Dropped out there. So something that you should think about, it's going to be a problem when you try to partner with company is what is the ROI? You need to understand how much would insurance help pay for these very complicated procedures. It's something that we should think about anyway. So insurance, you got to think about it. What these are going to be very expensive procedures. It's not like it's a pill. You can give out pills to people and the cost will be less. And the only reason I'm bringing this up is that, we're looking at this from the CAR T space. We've been actually looking at it a lot from the CAR T space. It's a very expensive procedure, and there is resistance from insurance companies for actually making it standard of care. Okay. So these are something that need to be considered. And it also can be this issue around insurance and how big pharma might not want to pick something like this up just because it is so expensive and it's not for a huge portion of population. You could argue that CIRM is needed in order to address subpopulations that will never get care any other way. And so that might be an avenue to start to explore, as opposed, we do the research part, but we should also start thinking in terms of, if you are going to position yourself for another ballot initiative, that it's actually care. I don't know if you're getting where I'm going with this, but I think it's an important point for sustainability and for actually helping granted a small group of people, but there is no other way that that they can have life in a lot of instances. So, and that can be part of an initiative, that this is a very important avenue for healthcare. Yes, we are boldly going where no one's gone before for research, but we also should think that we also play a very pivotal role in healthcare. And somehow, I don't quite know how to frame it yet, but while I was listening to you and I was listening to the other comments and concerns about moving forward in sustainability, I mean, for some people, this is the only way they're ever going to have life. And we should capitalize on that. So that's just my thoughts.
So thank you, Linda. And I think what you're talking about is really front and center in the affordability and access group, in our alpha clinics and the community centers of excellence. And we can circle back on this, but I wanted to recognize Don Taylor has been very patient.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And Vito, first, thank you for your diligence, data, and delivery of the presentation today. To me, it appeared that there was a lot of hard work and thought into that. And let me tell you what struck me the most as I was hearing your wonderful presentation. One of the first slides, the data that indicated that 15% of the respondents with respect to sunset CIRM 15% of those respondents supported sunsetting CIRM. And I think one of the anecdotes that you provided was that at least one of those respondents claimed that we should just declare victory because the mission was achieved, which then got me thinking about the slide, Vito. You made that minor augmentation to it with respect to the CIRM mission, where the CIRM mission speaks to accelerating world-class science and delivering transformative regenerative medicine and so forth. And I think you sort of, appended at the beginning of that to continue doing that, which I thought that was quite interesting, because I think that's the heart of the question here. Is it that we want to continue in that mission as defined, or is there an evolution of the mission that we really ought to be talking about that would be the strategic driver of the sustainability plan? Which then led me to, what are the criteria for prioritizing these potential pathways? And some example criteria would be mission alignment, going back to my first point about whether we should take for granted that we should just continue the mission as written, time to implement, political feasibility, return on investment, and so forth. So I thought I would just share those observations with you all.
Thank you very much, Don, for that. Vito, did you want to respond to that?
Well, thanks for the compliment. I had a lot of help with this, including from people in this very room. That second slide to continue is what I have passion for. I think CIRM has done sort of, I don't know whether it's Nobel Prize winning activity, but boy, it's way up there. In what it has accomplished, considering that 20 years ago, science was in its infancy and there were none of the apparatus and all of these thousands of people that we've trained. We've not created jobs. We have created an economic sector in California that perhaps is not as appreciated as it needs to be. And I think that the promise that CIRM offers is extraordinary. And I would like very much to work towards sustaining it. That's why I put the bad slide first, the valediction one, the pack up your tent and go off into the dark night. That is the only option that says there's no future for CIRM. The other 5 are the forward-looking options. So I'd like to investigate all of them, and if there are any others, or if there are hybrids that we haven't thought of those, I'm all for it. I'm intrigued by your comment, Don, whether we continue the mission or evolve. And I would like to carry that conversation on with you because I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I don't know exactly what that means. Maybe other people want to add their comments to that, but I'm intrigued by it.
Yeah, thank you, Vito. If I could just in case clarification is needed, I'm a big supporter of CIRM continuing. The question becomes, should a mission reassessment precede more in-depth sustainability model analysis? In case there's a more potent unmet need that the CIRM machinery could address. I think the question should be asked. The answer may be that the mission is sound and relevant for decades to come. So my point is that some emphasis on the mission might precede a bit more in-depth analysis on the different sustainability models, because clearly the sustainability models support, the model that would be selected would support the mission.
I think that you've made a really important point here, Don. you know, we've been at this for 20 years, and when we started out, we had to start out with building infrastructure. We had to build labs and buildings and that sort of thing. And then we had to train people to work in them, and we had to recruit faculty to come, excuse me, to come to California to work in those labs and in those buildings. And then we started rolling out our research programs, and we funded very basic discovery and subsequently translation, clinical trials, and so on. And we really are in a very different place right now. And I'd be interested, I know we don't have a motion on the table yet, but I'd be interested in other thoughts of the group about taking a pause and really trying to get our arms around whether the previous mission is what we want to sustain, or if there's a new mission that we'd like to at least consider as a group and with all of our stakeholders.
So it is, Pat. So, you know, the original, when we went through revising the mission statement, it was editing the original statement that had a more inclusive component to it in terms of the recognition that the therapies that were developed for all needed to be accessed by all Californians and beyond. But you know, there's an evolutionary component to all science, and it doesn't need a mission change for that to occur. In fact, what you just described is front and center example of the evolution of science that's happened for as long as science has been around. An initial discovery that turns into a translation of some sort that generally includes more than the individual themselves doing the research, trainees, you know, and others, et cetera, and then it becomes an application of some sort. So I'm all in favor of determining whether we're in the right place or not. But the thing that I think is, to be honest, to be most important, sustainability has to go hand in hand with a serious self-reflection of how we communicate who we are and what we do. Because I think from my perspective, it's nearly impossible to develop any kind of successful sustainability strategy without having a much better validated approach to communication. We all know this, right? We all know that we can meet state legislators who don't know what CERM is, let alone the population of California. So how can it doesn't matter what plan we come up with, if the public and those in the policy world don't know who we are and what we do, nothing is going to be successful. And I think in part, the change in vote, Vito, that you described is due in large part to a very large swath of the voting public not knowing what CERM is or what it does or why it matters. And so there just needs to be, from my perspective, a real wholesale change in terms of how we focus our resources and communication and how we do that. Otherwise, I think we're not going to be successful. And Maria's on, who oversees that, so she can
Yes.
criticize that criticism, or she can comment about it.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. I silenced the group with that one.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you're 100,000% right. I cannot tell you how frustrating it is to talk to my colleagues at my own institution who go, "What's CERM?" It's been 20 years, people. I mean, yeah. I mean, we're obviously, and you know, the amazing thing is we have so many wonderful stories to tell. It's all about the stories. And we have all of that now after 20 years. I'm sorry, Maria, were you starting to say something?
But I think you left everyone speechless because we all agree with you, Pat, I think.
I have a history of generating speechlessness.
know,
It's generally not good.
I'm just a little sensitive, and maybe others, of not to criticize CERM isn't in the business of putting a lot of money into our support services to include our comms department, at least historically. You know, we don't have maybe as robust a budget for that as all of our money goes into clinical research, foundational research, and all the support activities, infrastructure and education. I don't want, in speaking on that subject myself, ever to inadvertently impugn the efforts of our own communications effort. But I think if we ever went to the ballot again, or even to convince entities to partner with us, we will need a stronger message of who we are and what we've done.
Yeah, number one, I'm not talking about changes in resource allocation. I don't think that's the issue at all, to be honest. And what is generated and produced is really high quality. So, but we're talking about just like a reevaluation of where we are in terms of a research granting institution, right? To take stock of that. I think we have to recognize that while the communication generation is high quality, it may need a sea change in terms of how it's targeted and what the messaging, the content is, not the quality of the writing or the graphics or anything else. But I think things either resonate or they don't. In some ways, the terrible things that are happening in DC provide an opportunity because people's, you know, it's on the news, it's in social media every day now, about what's happening in terms of biomedical research and the attacks that are occurring. It's publicly known. I'm not telling anything that's out of order. So it's much higher on the consciousness of the public now than it ever has been, I would say. And so leveraging that while people are paying attention to it and understanding what we do, who we are, what we do, and the benefits that has been reaped by the state of California because of this 20 years of what I consider to be amazing progress. I think we should take advantage of that, and the sustainability planning and the communication planning, and just a way of integrating it in a way where they're going hand in hand, I think is something that we should seriously consider. And the board has members that have a lot of expertise in this area that can at least have a decent conversation about what to do.
You know, JT?
So,
Judy, JT wants to speak?
Oh, please.
thank you, Judy. So,
No, he keeps saying, no, he can't speak. He keeps sending me Dodger emojis. So
Why did you start, Pat?
glad you mentioned that, Pat.
it's like,
And I can't see you, JT, so jump in there.
go ahead, Jake. Begrudgingly, go ahead.
Yeah, so you're entirely correct on your various points. With respect to sort of a change in approach, we're out, as you know, for getting a new senior director of communications, and the emphasis on this particular iteration of that position is on strategic approach, which is something we haven't really focused on enough in the past. And so we're going to very much be looking towards redefining exactly what our communication should be doing to strategically get our message out to all stakeholders as best as possible. So we're very much on the same page with what you said.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I know we talked about this, that's exactly the point. And I don't think it's going to take changing resources. I think it's just going to thinking about how to focus the efforts in a way strategically that hasn't been done previously, and I think that'll be really important. So
that's right. And then your second point, absolutely accurate as well, as to the turmoil going on in Washington and the fact, which, by the way, I don't think there's anybody on this call who doesn't believe that's not going to be the case for quite some time. Certainly in our field as well as many others. And I do think it will present multiple opportunities to drive home the significance of what it is we're doing. And so that will absolutely be a focus of communications going forward.
Excellent. Thank you, JT. Any other comments? We don't need to have a motion today, so let's try to summarize the discussion that we've had up until now, which has been a great discussion, I think. And I think the point where we're at this point, Vito, is we should be thinking about defining exactly what the next steps are and putting some of these additional comments that we've gotten from people around issues such as funding for patients through the various programs that we have and possibly other programs, insurance reimbursement. We need a framework strategy going forward and thinking about our mission. So I think it would be great to start focusing on that in terms of the next steps. And I think all of us on the committee and others are happy to help with that discussion going forward. Are there any final comments from anybody who's on the call from CIRM?
Judy, just to clarify, what's the timing around next steps? As someone who sits on a group that helps, it would just be helpful for us to understand what sort of timing we're looking at.
Thank you, Maria. Good point. Now, our next board meeting is in June. And I know that the board would like to have a substantial update on where we are in terms of strategic planning for sustainability. We're not going to, it's unrealistic to think that we would be finished by then with the process, but I think in terms of the generating, what is this? This is early April. So I think coming up with some additional information around what the next steps would look like and what they would hope to achieve and what the strategies would be to get to those should, Maria, does it seem reasonable to your group and to George's and George and whoever else is on that working group to try to have something within the next month?
Yes, I think so.
Yes, George is nodding. Okay. Okay, so we have this group, which is the informal advisory group that will work with Vito and anybody else that wants to participate to try to come up with a roadmap forward for some next steps. And I appreciate everyone's time. Now, Scott, do we need to check in with the public for if there are any comments?
Well, there's not a motion, but we do have a segment of the agenda available for public comment when you're finished with this.
I don't see any other hands, and I think we have a plan to go forward. So if there's any comments from the public about this matter or any other matters, we'd be happy to entertain them at this point.
Doesn't appear so, Judy.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Okay, well, these are very challenging times, and we appreciate everyone's participation as we formulate our path forward, keeping in mind the context in which we find ourselves today. So thank you all for your time. Really appreciate it and your comments.